Hello everybody, welcome to my channel here, Wine with Jimmy. It's a wine educational channel designed for you to get more from wine, specifically if you are studying in the world of wine. So this is a part of a series for the WSET level for diploma. So we're going to go through the Rhone Valley overview. Now I'm teaching the Rhone in three major sections: the overview, the north of the Rhone, and the south of the Rhone. So this is the overview section. So this is going through the main topics across the whole Rhone Valley. And this is part 2 of 8. Now, parts 1 and 2 are available here on YouTube as free content. But parts 3 to 8 are only available on my wine educational portal. That's www.winewithjimmy.com. It's ad-free and it has lots of extra content, such as extra exclusive videos and other key tools to help you with your studies and understanding of the world of wine, flashcards, questions, etc. If you do have any comments on this video, any questions or any concerns, pop them in the comments section below. And whilst you're there, there's a couple of things you can also click. You could click subscribe to get weekly updates, and also the like button, because every little helps, of course. If you are social media inclined, then please get in touch via the social media you see at the bottom of every slide. Now, this video is going to be on the black grape varieties. Very important, because the Rhone Valley is dominated by red wine production and some rosé, with only a small percentage of white produced. We learnt this last time around. About 10% of production is white. So that means that red and rosé accounts for 9 out of 10 bottles. So black grape varieties, very important. Now, with all the major grape varieties, I'll go through some history about each one, what it's like in the vineyard, and then what it tastes like. Okay, so let's go through that information. Of course, very importantly here, we're going to start with Syrah, then move on to Grenache, and then on to Mourvedre. Now, some of you might not know this, but Syrah actually has had its DNA profiling, its ampelography mapped out in recent times. And it's been found that it is a crossing between Mondeuse Blanche, which is available in Savoie. It's the white version of Mondeuse Noire in Savoie, and Dureza, which is from the Ardèche in France. So making it a real kind of Rhone Alps mixture. So Syrah comes from, therefore, the Rhone Alps area. So there you are, the Rhone Alps variety. It's not from Syria, as a name might suggest. It's not from the Persian city of Shiraz, as the name may suggest. And it's not from the Sicilian port city of Syracuse, as the etymology may suggest. That's all been dispelled with the recent ampelography and the brilliant work which has been done in the last 20, 30 years or so, mapping out some of the key varieties. They have found that Pinot Noir is a great grandparent, so a very key link to it there as well. And it's also therefore related to Viognier, of course, a variety which it's very commonly found with and also co-fermented with in wine production. So what is it like in the vineyard? Well, here you are, a few things. So first of all, it is quite a vigorous vine. It's mid-ripening with a short ripening period between veraison and harvest, and also a short window of opportunity for optimum ripening as well. The variety can really suffer against wind damage, and of course, commonly here in the Rhone Valley, that is the very powerful Mistral wind. Now, it needs careful trellising and also training techniques to protect it from these winds, specifically when the vine is at its quite vulnerable in spring. And you'll see many stakes being used and almost like teepee structures called échalas are in place, these lovely little bits of structure to provide support against the quite forceful Mistral wind. It has a lot of susceptibility to issues. So it's susceptible to chlorosis, which if it's in soils with a high active lime content, and also if it's grafted onto 110R rootstocks, 110R rootstocks, that would be an issue and causing problems with chlorosis. It's also susceptible to mites and botrytis bunch rot, especially near harvest, and the berries are small and tend to shrivel when ripe. So that's where that ripening window becomes quite short. It's also susceptible to a specific disease called Syrah disease or disorder, which is something, of course, that they are looking into. Now, Syrah, in terms of its characteristics, here you are. It's the only black grape variety utilized in the northern Rhone crus, whose wines are typically deep ruby in color, with medium to pronounced intensity aromas, with flavors like violet on the top right of your picture, plum, black plum normally, but red plum in cooler areas or cooler vintages, and blackberry, black pepper, and herbal notes. The black pepper component is very important because this is from rotundone, which is this compound found in the grape. So you actually have the compound in the grape, and that carries through fermentation into the wine, creating this kind of black pepper characteristic, sometimes white pepper as well. Licorice could be a component too for this style. Acidity and tannins range from sort of medium to high, and Syrah adds structure, fruit and color, dark fruit and color into southern Rhone blends. Okay, so that's our Syrah variety. Next up, of course, is the very important Grenache variety. So Grenache, now the origins of Grenache are not completely well defined. There still needs to be significant work on this. But all three color variants, black, gray, and white, so noir, gris, and blanc, as well as other morphological mutations such as Garnacha peluda, which is the hairy Grenache, have all been observed in Spain and not that much in other areas such as Sardinia or France. France does have the hairy Grenache, however, and the other varieties. But it's the big debate here really is whether it comes from Spain or Sardinia originally. France was a later introduction to that area, and it says there's a variety that unites the populations of the Med, and it does in the sense that it's produced across the eastern part of Spain, southern France, the islands such as Sardinia, for instance, will find it. But it also kind of creates a disparity about really where it comes from originally. But recent morphological and genetic studies have provided evidence of a significant clonal diversity of Garnacha around areas like Aragon in North Spain, which means that its likely origin is Spanish and not so much Sardinia, but Sardinia does also state that it comes from there originally, and that forms into the thought process that the grape was probably originally brought over by Greeks, Romans, Phoenicians coming from the east towards the west, possibly. But there's big genetic diversity, the most we find in places like Aragon. So that's hence why we've got that up on the slide. Many, of course, grape synonyms, because it transcends boundaries into different countries. You'll find it being called Garnacha, sometimes Alicante in Spain. You'll find Grenache in France, Cannonau in Sardinia, and Tokai Rosso in Veneto as well. I've even seen it called Alicante in Tuscany in Italy too. So interesting in terms of its grouping of synonyms. Now, we really should call it Garnacha, because it's likely to come from Spain originally. But as we're doing the Rhone Valley, we're going to call it Grenache on this section. So what is it like in the vineyard? It's a high-yielding variety that needs, of course, lots of warmth to fully ripen, hence why it's a Mediterranean-loving variety. Its upright growth makes it very suitable to be trained as a bush vine, pruned short to contain its vigorous nature, and it does well on dry, low fertility soils. Often you'll find it on things like stony soils, sandy soils, for example. Envaso or albarello is the Spanish or Italian for the bush vine, or otherwise gobelet, that we find in France. It is early budding, not so much of a problem with frost here, but it does ripen late, and it can be affected by the early autumnal rains because of its late ripening. But generally, it has good drought tolerance, but it's prone to things like coulure, and I'll get to that on the next slide. But really, it's the drought resistance, and also it's actually fairly tolerant to windy conditions, hence why we find it in quite a lot of volume, of course, across the south of the Rhone. There you are, prone to coulure, which can lead to a reduction of yields, of course, and the fungal diseases such as downy mildew, phomopsis, and botrytis bunch rot. It's also actually prone to bacterial necrosis or bacterial blight, a disease that kills leaves and shoots and eventually the plant. This disease is combated by planting only disease-free stock and avoiding contamination from pruning tools. If you want more information on concepts like coulure and fungal diseases, please look at my videos on D1 on viticulture. Now, there are lots of mutations, of course. We have Grenache Gris, Blanc, which is, of course, your white version as well. As we mentioned, it's fairly productive and can accumulate very high sugar levels, which can be an issue in dry wines, but makes it very suitable for vin du naturel, our naturally sweet wines. Now, I've spoken to many grape growers of Grenache, and Grenache could typically come into a winery above 15% potential alcohol, sometimes 15.5, 16, which makes it really, really essential to be blended with other varieties, which may bring it down to a more manageable 15 or 14.5%. So hence a big reason why we do tend to find it blended. Not the only, but one of the big reasons. So Grenache characteristics. Now, it typically forms the major component, of course, in southern Rhone blends that may also include Syrah, Mourvedre, and other local varieties like Cinsault, Terret, and things like Carignan, etc. It doesn't add much color. It's very pale red, ruby, but it'll have things like ripe red fruits. So things like strawberry, red plum, cherry, of which can be jammy in warmer years. It's spicy and herbal as well. So often things like spices, cinnamon, white pepper, and even some slight herbaceous notes. It can have very high alcohol, low to medium tannins, and low acidity. So it tends to be fruity and jammy. The acidities can be a little bit better, certainly if it is from slightly cooler areas or cooler vintages. The third is M, and this completes the GSM, and this is Mourvedre. Now, Mourvedre was first mentioned by a gentleman in Emporta, which is in North Catalonia, towards the Spanish border. And this is as early as the 14th century, but it's also said to have been mentioned with the other variety famous around the Mediterranean, Bobal, around the 15th century as well. In France, Monastrell was probably introduced around the 16th century from a place called Mourvedre, which is now called Sagunto, to Provence, and hence why the name Mourvedre was given, because it came from a place called Mourvedre. It also has other names like Mataro. I'll get that up in a second, but potentially it's a sibling of Graciano, which of course is what we find across in North Spain around places like Navarra and Rioja. Now, the vineyard, well, I'm just going to mention the synonyms first of all. Monastrell, as you'll see just there, and also Mataro. So Monastrell is what we call it in Spain. Mataro is actually what we tend to call it in Australia. So three main names for this variety. So really we should be calling it Monastrell because it is from Spain originally, but we'll call it Mourvedre in this section because we are in the Rhone Valley in France. Now we have small to medium-sized compact bunches, which are small to medium-sized sweet thick-skinned berries with a distinctive bloom to them as well. Very late budding and very late ripening, so it's a whole late variety, this one. It's demanding and very difficult, and it requires very high temperatures, especially at the end of the ripening period. And it needs a significant supply of magnesium and potassium to ripen as well. There you are. So magnesium and potassium. So with the high temperatures, you'll find it down in the south of the Rhone, in the south of France, very classically around Bandol AOC, where it has this wonderful microclimate right next to the Mediterranean for extra warmth, almost like an amphitheatre facing south, where you get excellent heat conditions for this variety. Now, it's susceptible to mites and leaf hoppers. Also, it can be very susceptible to drought. So we need nice, deep, calcareous soils that provide a limited but regular supply of water to really help the best out of this variety. And of course, it's very, very low yielding. And we'll find it being trained as either a cordon or bush vine. So horizontally trained wood or as a bush vine. Mourvedre as a variety, so the wines are nearly always used as a blending partner in the Rhone, where it adds deep ruby colour, intense aromas of blackberries, blueberries, violets with high alcohol, high firm tannins as well. But remember, in Bandol, it really is the leading grape variety in the reds and the rosés of that village on the Mediterranean. So where it really produces the most complex. Please see my video on Bandol for greater information around that. And then we have a variety called Cinsault. You may see it written with an L between the U and the T. So Cinsault. So this bit of history behind this one. First of all, it's from the south of France, and it's actually a part of the Picpoul ampelographic group. So we know it's from the south of France. First mentioned as Marquin in the 17th century, then Cinsault and Cinsault in the 19th century. You can see a movement towards its etymology just there. And of course, it was used to breed Pinotage in the 1920s in South Africa. Now, here you are. So it is a late budding and high yielding variety with big bunches of big grapes. So it's often better with restricted production, so reducing the number of buds to really kind of keep the vigor in check. It has good drought and heat resistance, hence why we find it in big production numbers down here in the south of the Rhone, but also in places like South Africa. And if it's grown on soils with more lime, it can suffer with chlorosis, and it's prone to the rot of the trunk, esca, eutypa, and mites and grape moths as well. Here are the characteristics of Cinsault. It's typically used as a small part of the red blend or used for things like rosé production down here. It's typically made in a way that preserves the fresh characteristics. So we'll find mid-range fermentation temperatures, stainless steel use to really preserve the bright fruitiness of this. And you'll get light pale colors, which are normally reddish in color, medium to medium plus intensities of the red cherries, raspberries, as you'll see here, strawberries as well. High alcohols with low to medium tannins. And the wine often is said to be better drunk in the younger stage of its life, for the most part, for Cinsault. Okay, now, really, they're the four major grapes. There is also Carignan used here and others, but they're not mentioned in too greater detail for the diploma. Carignan also, it's better to actually look at the Southern French videos where I go into much greater detail about that style. Okay, so that brings me to the end, and that covers the syllabus for the diploma for black grape varieties of the Rhone Valley. I have gone into a lot more detail about the history, but I really love adding that context in because it gives you just a bit more flavor for the varieties. Now, please do join me for the next installment. That's going to be on the white grape varieties, of course, things like Marsanne, Roussanne, and Viognier. But this video, plus parts 4 through to 8, will only be available on my e-learning portal. It's ad-free and it has lots of extra exclusive content to help you with your studies. Please visit www.winewithjimmy.com to have a look at my online portal. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for stopping by. If you do have any comments, questions, please pop them in the comment section below or get in touch with the social media. Please make sure you click subscribe and like as well. And if you find yourself in London, in the United Kingdom, then please come and see me for a class, a glass, or a bottle. I've been Jimmy Smith. Ciao for now. Bye.